All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Cultish, entering the Kingdom of the Cults. My name is Jeremiah Roberts, one of the co-hosts here. I am flying solo today. The Super Sleuth is preoccupied super sleuthing on our super secret project.
He's on mission.
Not really. I mean, we're studying on for our series. He's researching for our series in Seventh-day Adventism that is pending. We're having him solely focused on that. But I'm here flying solo with Will Spencer. It's good to have you back, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I guess we're waving here. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
We're on YouTube.
Hello.
We'll stream later.
Yeah.
Most of our audience is via podcast, but good to have you back, man. In part one, you're kind of chatting. We're kind of going through a timeline from when I first met you.
Yeah.
When we were at man camp, you burned up your tarot cards. They were self-painted, and we were talking about your whole interest in spirituality from the time as a young man in a synagogue, kind of jumping out around from modality to modality, a lot of involvement in Burning Man. We're going to jump into that further. So carrying off in part one, in part two, you said after 2013 Burning Man, you started taking an interest in the Kabbalah.
Yeah.
Just bring us into that.
Yeah, so I had this tattoo with the phrase Tikkun Olam, which is a Hebrew phrase that means to heal the world. That's how I had always heard it. And my post about the tattoo went viral, and someone reached out to me, I think from Europe somewhere, saying, "Have you heard about the Kabbalah?" I said, "Yeah, sort of. I don't know too much about it." He's like, "Well, you can take this online occultism school and you can study it." I'm like, "Okay, cool. I've never explored that before," because I had kind of come to understand as much as I needed to. I thought about psychology, Buddhism, Eastern spirituality, the New Age, hippies, the whole thing. But the occult stuff I'd never actually gotten into. And so I signed up for this online school, which delivered lessons, one lesson per week in a printed lesson that was delivered through the mail. And so it was an at-home, kind of like a correspondence course. And the correspondence course was about the tarot. And so a lot of people have heard of tarot cards and they know them as a fortune-telling kind of tool. That's actually, well, according to this online mystery school, which is what they call themselves, tarot cards were not originally invented as a fortune-telling school. They were invented as a way to protect esoteric knowledge about the Kabbalah from persecution by the Catholic Church. This is their narrative. So all this mystical occult tradition had to go underground sometime in the 1100s or 1200s or something like that. And so that knowledge was encapsulated in the symbolism of the tarot cards, the 22 major keys. So by studying the tarot cards and unpacking their symbolism, you can study the Western occult tradition and get to know the Kabbalah symbolically versus just reading the text.
And
that's their story.
And I have in front of me a copy of Kingdom of the Occult by the late Dr. Walter Martin, which is really a lot of his lectures put out on print by his daughter Jill Martin. And there is a section in here about the Kabbalah, but just for the sake of time, for anyone who's maybe listening for the first time and is asking, people are asking, okay, well, what's Burning Man, right? And we were kind of defining that. A lot of people might ask as well too, like the Kabbalah, like they've heard of it in passing. Like define real quickly what that is for anyone who doesn't know.
I think the short definition I would describe the Kabbalah, it seeks to describe the mystical structure of the universe. Like how did God build the universe? What's it actually built out of? What were the operating principles that he constructed reality out of? And so the Kabbalah is an attempt to describe that. It's ancient Hebrew mysticism. So everyone's heard of the Torah, which is like the Old Testament, right? There's also the Talmud, which is like rabbinic commentary on the Old Testament, which is a whole thing. And then the Kabbalah is like the mystical dimension of things. So it's what is the mystical dimensions of reality? Let's put it that way. That's what that whole study is about.
And aren't there a lot of people in Hollywood who that just takes a real cultural fascination? I mean, I just remember sort of hearing in passing, like people like Madonna, she is very outspoken about her. I think Ray Comfort actually had a book that he used as an evangelistic tool called What Hollywood Really Believes. And I think in it, he kind of explored what different celebrities, including Madonna, believe. I think he brought up the Kabbalah, if I'm not mistaken, but he used it as a catalyst to share the gospel. But that is something that is very popular as well, too, just culturally. That seems to kind of stick out. Yeah.
I mean, you can Google red string bracelet. And that's a Kabbalistic kind of thing that you wear the red string bracelet as to sort of signal that you study the Kabbalah. And so you can find all sorts of celebrities doing that. You can also go to the Good Fight Ministries YouTube page, Joe Schimmel. He has a whole series on the way that Kabbalistic symbolism shows up, particularly in the music industry and music videos and stuff like that. The Kabbalistic tree of life is this kind of like diagram that sort of shows how the universe is constructed, like symbolically. That's the Kabbalistic tree of life.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Have you ever wanted to get behind the microphone and chat with myself and Andrew, the super sleuth of the show here at Cultish? Well, guess what? You get to do exactly that this October 27th through the 29th at ReformCon. It's going to be a great and awesome live conference. There's going to be a lot of great speakers. So if you want to get behind a microphone with myself and Andrew, the super sleuth of the show, go to reformcon.org. Get your tickets right now, October 27th through the 29th, and can't wait to meet you all there and have a great conversation. Now back to the episode. Gotcha. And then so for you personally, when you got into this, like what was appealing to you? Because I mean, at this point, there is a lot of petri dishes you kind of stuck your hand into, like many dishes. Kind of like you think like a Baptist potluck, right? And where you can just put in a smorgasbord of everything, and you kind of have like a food hangover afterwards. In the same way, you're jumping around doing all these different spiritualities, practices, taking these different psychedelics, these different ayahuasca trips. But then you come across the Kabbalah. What was distinct about that? Like, why was that appealing to you?
Because the Eastern mysticism is really kind of out there in our culture, right? But through Buddhism and Hinduism, the lotus flower, all this symbolism is really present in the New Age. The Kabbalah is Western occult tradition, Western mysticism, which we don't hear much about. And there's reason for that, which we'll get into. There's good reason for that. So because it was a whole new style of mysticism that not only I'd never heard of, but that seemed forbidden, that is forbidden in many ways, and again for good reason. I was like, oh, that's interesting. This is like sort of like occult, hidden, forbidden knowledge. Even better, like a secret knowledge that not a lot of people have. Sign me up. For better or worse.
Yeah. And so what did that look like for you? Like, how did you like practicing it? Like when you started looking into it, like practically.
Yeah.
How did that look? What did that look like for you?
So the lessons were delivered. There were printed lessons that were sent to me in the mail. So I'd read one lesson per week. And the very first set of lessons is all about visualization and manifesting. It's all about manifesting your will, like learning that process of how the mind works. And then the next sets of lessons, I did 3 grades. So first grade, second grade, third grade. The first one was about the manifesting that I just mentioned. The second grade introduces the tarot cards. And so the tarot cards are these densely packed webs of symbols. Each card is not just one symbol, but lots of symbols packed together. And so you study each one card per week and understand all the symbolism in the card, and then how that symbolism ties to other symbolism just in the black and white version. And then the next grade, third grade, we actually like two weeks per card, and that's when I hand painted the cards that we burned together. And so that whole process of understanding the depth and the interconnection of symbolism, I would read those lessons in the morning when I would wake up, and I would meditate on the card for a few minutes to kind of like take it into my mind and sort of ruminate on it, let it unpack itself. And so it was a daily practice, sometimes for an hour or two every morning.
And again, you're very dedicated. I mean, we'll even go where we only scratch the surface of what you've tapped into. I mean, so far, like at this point in your linear journey, was there points where maybe you're thinking like, man, this is step 17 on the bridge to total freedom? Like,
that's a good question.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, because it's dedicated, and again, it's a new practice. It seems very exciting, different. It's secret, forbidden knowledge. It's kind of that's usually the general appeal of whatever you're getting into. But there's got to be maybe a little bit of like, okay,
am I getting there yet?
Is this it? Is this it? Or like, but then it's like, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mystical world now, because we're out of New Age mysticism, the mystical world, it has this ongoing promise of enlightenment, right, where you finally make it. But it structures things in such a way that each lifetime is a lesson, and so you can go through an infinite number of lifetimes to earn all the lessons. And so it's like, well, might be an important lifetime, and then I'll have another one. So I don't know that I ever thought of things as like, okay, this is the one that's going to do it. Plus, again, a lot of it is just really organic curiosity. Like when I was a little kid, like this hunger to understand the truth, right? So there was like, why do people learn to cook? They learn to cook not because they're going to make one meal that like ends everything. They enjoy the process of it, and that was a lot of it for me. Is I enjoyed the process of it because it was it was interesting, like as in like I was genuinely interested in it. So there was a little bit of a spiritual component. This is my practice to improve in this lifetime or ascend in whatever future lifetime, but also like really curious about that. What's going on here, right?
Gotcha. So you're kind of almost maybe like you're like the Gordon Ramsay of like pseudo spirituality.
I like that. I'm going to take that. Yes, I'll take that. Yes,
like you're literally playing in Hell's Kitchen if you want to go there.
For real. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really the catalyst, the gap between 2013.
I'll put that on Twitter.
2015. I just thought of it.
That's so good.
Now my brain's like wanting to do like a Gordon Ramsay impression, but I have to stay on
focus. Stay on target.
We're totally going to lose it.
Yeah.
But that was like really the main like focus between 2013 and 2015 was really getting into the Kabbalah.
Very much so, and like daily practice. So like for that 2 years, I was studying. Now the Kabbalah, the Western occult tradition isn't just about tarot. It also loops in alchemy and astrology and all these different practices. Are all it's like the
syncretistic. It all sort of merges together.
Yes,
I mean like even like the way you're assembling it, it's kind of like one of those like weird magnetic puzzles. Like I remember with these, I forget what type of toys they were as a kid, but they were these blocks, but they were magnetic. They weren't necessarily puzzle pieces, but you could kind of make your own thing.
Yeah,
that's kind of what it is. Like we just had Angela Ucci on, who came out of astrology.
Yeah, she was great.
Yeah, and then we had Amber on, and or Teresa Gentry, and all of them have a lot of the same practices that you did, but they syncretize them maybe a little bit differently.
Yes, and that's what you do.
Right.
That's what you do. That's a great analogy, because I felt that my study of Western occultism did snap everything into a place and gave it a structure. Yeah. Because part of the challenge with Eastern mysticism is that we don't, you and I and everyone in America and Europe, we don't grow up in the East. Right, so we're not familiar with a lot of Eastern symbols. We have to learn them in their foreign symbols from foreign cultures. Western mysticism has Western symbols, so it works better with the culture that we grow up in.
Right.
And so it's like, oh wow, this is something that's actually like part of me and part of my background. And so I could bolt on all the Eastern tradition stuff, and the Western occult tradition actually says that it's all the same thing expressed through two different lenses. Yeah. So it was a way, like you nailed it. It's a way to start putting all the pieces together in a way that worked for me. Well, and it's so, just real quick, it's fantastically detailed. Like there's so many different details that you can get lost in and so much to study. And for a guy like me that's always trying to put together big ideas, it was a world that I could spend endless amount of time in and like never get bored of it. There's always something else to learn cognitively.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also as we unpack like your story further, it's important to know too that while as a whole, the occult, New Age spirituality as a whole is simplistic in the sense that it's oneism versus twoism.
Yeah.
But what you also see is it differentiates between culture. So when you look at the occult and pagan practices, when it comes to how it's practiced in India, it differs from a lot of the like the Buddhist monasteries, or if you look at like how it's practiced, like the weird folklore in New Orleans versus a lot of the folklore. We had a series based that was in West Virginia of like a lot of the backwoods occult spirituality is very different in Virginia than it is New Orleans.
Yes,
and even like generational wise, like we're in our 40s. You look at the TikTok generation, I almost feel like Steve Buscemi, like, hey, how you doing there, kids?
The skateboard in the back.
Yeah, I feel like they're trying to be cool to the intergeneration. But so you see a lot of that culture, the influencer culture, or whatever you want to call it. But now you see them depicting the same pagan practices that you were in, but they're doing it through the lens of something like witch talk or something else as well too.
Yes, you nailed it. A good example is like Norse Paganism.
Yeah.
So you see these runes, right? These sort of crude stick drawings, right? So runes, it's the same thing. It's all the same thing. So you pull up it's a series of characters, 15, 20 characters, however many, and you use these symbols, you meditate on them, and you use them to focus your consciousness to manifest your will. It's the same thing. It's all the same thing all over the world. And it's all about the manifestation of your will, not God's will, your will. And that's where the things get very sticky and very dangerous.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So take us then into 2015 Burning Man. Like that's the last Burning Man that you attended. What was that like, and how did it differ from the two previous ones?
Oh, you're gonna love the story. So I had used the tarot cards, which were very much about manifesting. I'd used them to change things in my life successfully because I was stuck in a lot of really bad situations, and I had used them. Now, whether I used them to change anything materially in the universe, or I just used them successfully to pull myself out of my own muck, let's say, like I can't really say, but something about the discipline of doing that helped me change something fundamental about myself. And I made some really big changes in my life that included ending the relationship that I had been in that kept me from going to Burning Man previously. That's a whole separate subject of conversation. So I ended up going to Burning Man in 2015, and very spontaneously, like I woke up one morning, like, why would I ever go to Burning Man? I woke up the next morning, I'm like, I'm going to Burning Man. So because things had changed literally for me overnight. I go out to Burning Man and I set up camp with some friends that I just like, hey, you guys got room for me? What are you doing here? Long story, I'll tell you later. Yeah. And I woke up the following morning and I talked to the guy I was camping next to. I told him I'd just come off a breakup, and he said, you know, if you're coming off a breakup, you should go to this camp called Spirit Dream. They might be able to help you work through some of those things.
And this is a camp within the Burning Man.
A camp within the Black Rock City, yeah. Because he had just come there and he said that he had a great experience talking with them, and they did some healing practices and maybe some dream interpretation.
Right. And just real quick, if you do the drone shot view of Burning Man, just as we go into that, you'll see in the center point of the Burning Man, but you'll see this literal encampment.
Arc of, yeah.
And within it, you have RVs, you have tents, but you also have, bigger tents where there's specific, festivals that you can take place in, maybe different clubs, different things. So this is an area you called it was a spirit. What was it? It was
called, the name of the camp was called Spirit Dream.
Spirit Dream.
Yeah. And so the Burning Man festival is organized like there's the man in the center, and then there's a big semicircle of where people are set up, and there's streets and avenues. So it's like you would say to somebody, I'm camped at 3 o'clock in B, which says you're at the 3 o'clock point, and then you're 2 lanes in from the man. So so he sent me to wherever Spirit Dream the camp was set up, and you have a space that's described for you and however many people, and you set up your tents and your big tent there, and you can offer services to people. It can be as simple as like you can have a band or a DJ tent or whatever. You can have an orgy dome. Like the whole spectrum is there. So I had done a lot of inner healing stuff, and he said, well, if you go to Spirit Dream, they do some healing stuff. You should go talk to them. I said, okay, that sounds good to me. Like I'm always up. Like, here I am. What else am I going to do today? So I went to Spirit Dream, and they had a big board of services and one of them was dream interpretation and various like counseling kind of stuff, talking about your past. It's like, okay, cool. I could kind of use some of this because I'm grieving. So I go into the camp, and I get seated with 3 people. There's a woman in her early 40s, a woman in her late 50s, and a man in his 70s. And I'm sitting there, and they're like, so what brings you in today? I said, well, I'm coming off of a breakup, and things are really tough. And then I ended up in this 3.5 hour long, I would call it a healing session with them, where I'm just unpacking all of these things from my past related to my childhood and mistaken beliefs and that I had about myself and my parents. And there was nothing really mystical about it. It was just being in their kind of loving presence gave me the opportunity to really open up about a lot of things that were really present for me in that moment, and really heal a lot of things. The woman in her 40s, her name was Barb, and she was talking about what it was like for her being a mother, and that was really healing for me to get to hear, like, how a healthy mother treats her son. Right. And then the older gentleman there, GI was his Burning Man name. You get Burning Man names. He helped me, work through a lot of stuff related to, what it means to be a father. It was really cathartic. Yeah. It was really cathartic for me,
right?
In a very positive way.
Would you say that, like, this moment when you're going through all this inside this small section of Burning Camp, this was like a very emotional experience for you, right?
Very, very emotional. Yeah.
I've seen people send us stuff all the time, and thankfully we have an assistant, Ash. Shout out to Ash, her assistant. Yeah. Love you. It's been very helpful, but usually I'm lucky if I can check like 10% of the messages people send us, but sure, people send us crazy stuff all the time. Some of them have just been like random pieces of footage from like New Age retreats where it's like men and women, they're doing something where everyone's around them, their hands are on them, and they're crying uncontrollably. And there's part of me where it's like I have to be careful about what I post, and even if I post it, how I structure the conversation. Because it's very easy, especially in clickbait, outrage porn world, where you just want to be angry. You know, with anything that's politically charged right now is huge, where it's very easy for just people like, oh, they're stupid, or just people just kind of like mock and deride these people who are having this very emotional experience. It's easy to do that from afar. I think it is important to realize that you, in this moment, and many other New Agers that I've talked to, more than I'm going to talk to in the future, they are Walter Martin says they're seeking out for help, but they're not finding it from Christ. They're trying to find it from the forces of evil. So I think there's a level in which you need to understand the spiritual danger of a lot of these practices, but also understand that our battle is not against flesh and blood.
Yes.
Our battle is not against the people who are experiencing these healings. It's about the principalities and powers that are binding these people, trying to find peace in this encampment. And really what's taking place is just knowing the nature of what you called it, mediumship.
Well,
did I jump ahead, or
you might have jumped ahead a little bit.
Yeah, I was ranting a little bit.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong that there's a lot of that going on. You're not wrong that a lot of people who go to Burning Man are carrying really intense mental, emotional, psychological burdens, as we all do.
Right.
And they feel like that they need to heal. They need to heal themselves. Right, and that it's all about the self, and this is the entire problem with the New Age ideology in particular, which is it's very much about the self. And we'll talk about this when we get to the Aubrey Marcus and Aaron Rodgers interview. It's a lot about me, living my best life, stepping into my power, and all that stuff.
Right.
And so they're not wrong in that they're crying out for help, but where they're wrong in that is that there's something beyond the self. There's something beyond this oneness notion of we are all God. There's a creator and a universe and a story that we participate in, that we're blessed to participate in. And the real freedom doesn't just come from healing your own inner wounds. You know, it comes from reconciliation with the creator's story and really finding that's where real peace is to be found. You can't find true peace. This is what I've discovered. On the back half of the story that I want to finish. But the real peace can't ever be found inside the self. Real peace can only be found by coming into reconciliation with reality, with the creator, with accepting, God's love and forgiveness. That's where true peace is really found. And that's why people can get lost very easily in the New Age healing world.
Yeah. Hey everyone, if you are watching us right now on Apologia Studios YouTube channel, you need to know that Cultish would not be possible if it wasn't for this studio. So if you want to support Apologia Studios, which also makes Cultish a possibility for you to enjoy every single week here on YouTube, go to apologiastudios.com. You can become an all-access member, and you will also get a lot of great additional content, which will also help support the studio, which will allow Cultish to be a possibility as well on a weekly basis. So we thank you all for watching us, and now back to the episode. For sure. So again, going back to your old self pre-Christ, you're in this tent, you're seeking for healing. This is a very emotional experience. What happened from there?
Well, so I'm looking around the tent now. I've done a lot of healing practices before, and when you participate in a lot of these circles, I guess you'd say, you can look around and say, especially at Burning Man, at some of the tents, say like, okay, there's a Shiva statue over there, or there's some psychedelic art, or there's a Buddha, where they kind of signal what their worldview is in various ways, right? It's just decoration. But I'm looking around, I'm not really seeing any of that, and I'm like, what's going on here? So I go through this really powerful experience where I let a lot of things go, and I wouldn't call it mediumship at all. It was just real loving presence, and the ability to be accepted. And I was dealing with a lot of grief, and so it was a good time to talk things through in a I guess you might say a counseling kind of way. But at the end of this session, the older woman, Katie, is standing behind me, and she has her hands on either side of her head, of my head, standing behind me, and she's saying something, and I can't make out what she's saying, and my eyes are closed, and this is at the end of 3.5 hours, and my eyes are closed, and I have this vision, and in this vision, I'm on this Burning Man street. I can see the flags flapping in the wind, and dust and tents and stuff like that, and as I'm there in this vision, this man walks up to me, and he's wearing goggles, and I see the shape of his jaw and the rough shape of his head, his hair. I'm like, okay. And then the face seems to insist, like, no, look. I'm like, okay. I look and I see the face, And it's like, okay, the face registers. And then I open my eyes, and then Katie says, there's someone I want you to meet. I'm like, okay. So I follow her to the other side of the tent, on the other side of this pillar that I could not have seen the other side of. When I walked in, I turned past the pillar and I didn't see the opposite side of it. She turns me around, points me up at the pillar, and painted on the pillar was the face that I had just seen in my vision, minus the goggles. And it was the Akiane portrait of Christ. And so that was a very powerful moment where I was like, I didn't know what to make of any of that, but I've got photos of this. I got down on my knees and I bowed my head in the dirt, and it was just very potent for me. And I asked, well, who are you guys? Like, we're Christians. We've been running a ministry here for 12 years to show the Father's love to people.
Do you know who they were? Do you remember any of their names? 'Cause I know there are people who do go to the Burning Man specifically to share the gospel.
Yeah, they're good friends of mine. Yeah, so again, they're charismatics. I'm not too familiar with different denominations yet, but they're charismatics, and they're based largely. They live all around the country, but they're mostly based out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And they had been going to Burning Man for 12 years. They had gotten a prophetic word that they needed to make Burning Man a mission field, and they had said, really? Because they looked into it like, why would we go out there? And it's like, no, this is where you need to go. And so they went out to Burning Man, and what little I understand about the charismatic position towards evangelism is that's very focused on the Holy Spirit. And so very love oriented, and that was what they brought. And they happened to speak the right language of love to people like me who needed to hear it. That was the right approach, because sin and repentance would not have gone over well.
Yeah, or even too, like, I actually just had a conversation this morning with someone who's an active Reiki energy healer, and you have to like think with tact, and yet you would actually hear this too if you listen to any of Walter Martin's messages. He always had an ability to speak in his audience's native tongue. In fact, there's a point where I think he's lecturing on Hare Krishnas and transcendental meditation, and he articulates the gospel, sin, repentance, and the experience of forgiveness as the ultimate trip the human soul can take.
Amen to that.
But he does it in such a way to where he speaks in their native tongue. And I think
so
in the same way how Paul says, as your poets have written, we are all his children, when you see that talk at Mars Hill, he's using that culture around them to articulate those things. And I'll talk more about that conversation with that Reiki healer as well too. But that had to be an interesting experience. So this is the first time you have this idea. They introduce you to the idea of Jesus then.
Yeah, absolutely. So they would have been going for a number of years. They would always leave before the big burn on Saturday night because they weren't there to party. There were very strict rules for people coming out there, and and they were really committed to what they were doing, and they were just there to love up on people. And if people asked what they're all about, they would tell them, and if they didn't tell them. I just happened to ask, and so they said they were Christians, and it was like, I've literally never met Christians like you before in my life. It's like, what is this? That was the biggest thing. It wasn't, the vision of Christ was important. I can come back to what that ended up doing for me later, but it was seeing them embody these Christian values in such a whole and loving and kind way that welcomed me in. That was the culture that I was in. It welcomed me in this new way. And I ended up flying to spend Christmas with them that December. And to celebrate a real Christmas and be welcomed in, and to go to church with them, and have this big feast. And they gave me a copy of the NIV Bible that they had all signed as a gift. And it was like, what kind of Christians are you?
Yeah.
Because again, I had come from the Bay Area where it's like Christians are like, you don't talk to them, they're the ignorant ones or whatever, you know what I mean? But that I didn't experience it. And plus I had gone to a Catholic high school, which is its own way of presenting things.
This is almost like an episode of like Undercover Boss. They're like, except it's undercover Christian. It's like Burning Man.
That's exactly what they've been doing. Exactly. Okay. And so that's the thing, is that Christ found me at Burning Man. And that's proof that Christ can go anywhere. Lord over all the heaven and the earth. Like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to meet this guy. And when I tell people that story, it trips them out. Like, maybe they implanted some vision in your head or whatever. It's like, no, like Christ had goggles on in my vision and did not have goggles on the painting, right? But probably because it probably would have been a lot for me to look into Christ's eyes. Like, I think that was probably a kindness to me.
Right. But even this beginning idea where you understand, okay, this is actually, I have a perception of who Christians are by these people who befriended you at Burning Man and showed you the love of God, and they gave you this Bible. That that was maybe a catalyst to kind of get you thinking about that. But
yes.
You still started jumping around in other places still.
Yes.
Tell us about that. What happened after Burning Man 2015?
Yeah, so I didn't really know what to do with that vision, but I did file it away, and I did keep in touch with that group in Idaho, which we'll come back to. But also at Burning Man, I met a guy who introduced me to ayahuasca. So I came back from the Bay Area in September of 2015, and I contacted this ayahuasca shaman to sit and do ayahuasca for the first time in November of 2015. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the split, right? Yeah. And plus I had also decided one of my lifelong dreams had been to backpack around the world. And one of the things that had come out of that healing session at Spirit Dream was like, okay, I'm really going to do this. And to give you an idea of who I was at the time, like I needed to ask strangers for permission. Like, is it okay that I do this? Like, this had been my dream for 15 years to travel around the world, and I had to ask them for permission. And they're like, you don't have to ask us, but yes. I'm like, cool. Yeah. So I decided to go and do that. So a bunch came out of that. I was introduced to Christ. I determined that I was going to travel around the world, and I got introduced to ayahuasca as well, which I followed up on when I got back to the Bay Area.
Mm. And so when it comes to, I mean, we're having a conversation too about the different. You'd already tried quite a few psychedelics going back when you were in your college years and just got introduced into the underground DJ world via 1999 and what we talked about in part one. This is a whole new game, and you're seeing a whole new game. And in fact, and people ask, well, why are we talking about this? Is a Christian podcast? Like, why are you talking about ayahuasca? Like, what's the big deal?
You're going to hear more about this one way or another, right?
Like, you're going to hear about whether you like it or not.
Yes.
Like, for example, this is the very first series on the New Age and the Occult we ever did was the Stephen Bancar's in one of our premiere episodes, and him mentioning on the podcast was the first time I'd ever even heard of that, and I had no idea what he was talking about. Now what you'll see is, and again, we'll get this later on in the episode, you're seeing conversations between Aubrey Marcus and Aaron Rodgers, who's been I think he was back-to-back MVPs for the Green Bay Packers. And he's now very open to where now even there's controversy on ESPN where they're saying, well, why should he be doing these ayahuasca trips out in the jungle and being like upset and calling him crazy, but then he's going on Joe Rogan and Aubrey Marcus, and this is becoming a normalized conversation.
Yes. And
you can't hide from it. You need to learn and understand what these medicinal properties are, what they do to you physiologically, but also the spiritual component of it as well too. This is something, no matter, you can't even if you're a mom listening in, you can't shelter your kids from this. You're going to have a conversation. This is what this is. That's going to be part of family worship, honestly, in the future.
Yes.
Is probably explaining to me, like my children, I'm going to have to explain to them what ayahuasca is and like why you shouldn't take it from my perspective. But anyways, you were introduced to it. And go ahead, just tell them into that. Like, what was that like?
Well, just real quick, that's why I'm really excited to have this conversation because, my own natural curiosity through spirituality has let me see so many different perspectives and come to understand really what the Eastern mysticism, the New Age, Western occultism, and ayahuasca really are, because I have different frames of reference to understand them because I've gone through so many different worlds. So I traveled through all these worlds and I really do believe that God kept me safe because he needed me to because there's absolutely no reason that I should be sitting here. All the different practices I've done, we haven't got to some of the stuff that I saw, like the Kumbh Mela Hindu festival, 190 million Hindus, bathing in the Ganges River, meditate. We'll talk about that later. But I've seen so many different things. And so I'm able to understand them and communicate what they are in a way that you might not hear on TikTok, or you might not hear it on Joe Rogan or whatever, to really say, no, this is actually what's going on. So that's why I'm excited to have this conversation with you, because I can translate it for a Christian audience and for a mainstream audience who will probably be hearing about Burning Man or ayahuasca or whatever, one way or another. So
So before we actually get into the usage, like define everyone what ayahuasca is. It's a plant, and it's definitely psychoactive for sure.
Yes.
Like just explain it really quickly from your perspective what it is, in case anyone doesn't know.
Yeah. So ayahuasca is two things. In the material realm, it's a drink, it's a brew, it's like a tea made
like yerba mate.
Yeah, exactly. It's made of a couple different plants. The ayahuasca root, and I can't remember the other name, but they're two that are mixed together, and it contains DMT. And you drink it, and the ayahuasca the mixture of the two plants together allows you to digest the DMT through your stomach when normally your stomach acid would eat it up. So it's basically DMT dimethyltryptamine. It's a very powerful psychoactive chemical. So you drink this brew, and it's like drinking a psychedelic. That's what it is on the material realm. On the spiritual realm, what ayahuasca is, you'll hear it referred to as a grandmother spirit. It's a disembodied entity, right, that exists in the realm of spirit. And by drinking the brew, this is exactly what it is. But it's never described in these terms. By drinking the brew, what you are doing is you're giving consent to this spirit, this disembodied spirit, to work on your energy body or work on your spirit to heal you, cleanse you. It's a purgative, so you'll have people having stories about throwing up and getting diarrhea. It's supposed to take all this stuff out of your body.
Yeah, like Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly, like they had a very conversation. They've been open about them having that sort of experience.
Yes. So what a lot of people will talk about is you're drinking this physical brew and you're having all the physical symptoms. What they don't talk about is that when you drink it and you're having this expanded psychedelic experience, what you're actually doing is you're allowing disembodied spirits, the grandmother spirit of ayahuasca and the other plant helpers, to work on your energy body. You're giving them permission to work on you. And that's facilitated through a shaman who sits in front of you and sings songs, and the vibration of the song summons the plants to work on your energy body to manifest whatever desires that you have for yourself and your future. That's exactly what it is.
In other words, this is like if oneism was a beverage, like if I could
you kill me, dude.
I'm just thinking out loud.
So good.
Like this is if I could, like, that's literally what that is. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no distinction between the drink and the beverage and like the spiritual component to it.
Right.
Almost it's like if yoga was a beverage, like if I could drink yoga, it would be ayahuasca.
Bingo.
You'll have to tweet that later.
That's right. Like, we've got the anyway. Got the chef that
we got the idea. I think you're going to reference the Gordon Ramsay thing.
Yeah, Gordon Ramsay. That's it.
But in seriousness, though, this is something that is incredibly spiritual dangerous, given what the Word of God says about the dangers of mediumship, the dangers of when you cross over. In fact, what I was trying to articulate to this young lady who was a Reiki practitioner this morning, I said, you could be in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. You could have a humanitarian plane with all these supplies to help feed the hungry, the poor, and the needy. If you cross over into a no-fly zone, regardless of how pure your intentions are, you're in trouble. You're going to have MiGs going after you. You're going to have a bunch of people with SAMs like trying to take you down. In the same way, when it comes to the world of the occult, no matter whether it's through any of the modalities, it has it serves the same purpose to access certain forbidden hidden dimensions, and you don't have control over what comes over the other side, and that's why you see a commonality between the different stories that people go through these trips, through these experiences of ayahuasca.
Yes, and it's all very self-centric. Like the reason why you study these things is because you want to improve yourself to live your best life and step into your power. That's the purpose of all of it. So the same reason that I study something like the tarot and the Kabbalah is all about self-empowerment, right? Because it's ultimately about manifesting your will. It's the same with ayahuasca. By the way, the leaf that the ayahuasca root is blended with is called chacruna. So when you say ayahuasca, what you're really talking about is the blend between the ayahuasca vine and the chacruna leaf, and that's what allows you to digest the DMT. So these are all about self-improvement, self-fulfillment, which ultimately leads to self-transcendence. Self the entire way. And so you nailed it, man. That's one of the reasons why I really have such appreciation for you and what you do is you have a real good grasp of all these things, because like I had to live 20 years of my life in it, and to understand it from the outside is tough. So.
Yeah, I feel like my experience is that my first introduction to the occult was, well, a couple of things is that I remember being 11 years old living in Prescott, Arizona. My neighbor, I had a neighbor and his name was Ben Fry, and he was a kid, like, we all have those like kids and classmates who could tell tall tales, right? But there's certain times where you see the same people and you know when they're telling the truth. You know when they're not BSing you.
Yeah.
My friend Ben, I was over at his house and he started telling me about, like, he had like deer in the headlights. He seemed like really bothered. And I was, as 11-year-old boy, I'm very observant. I'm asking like, Ben, what's what's the deal, man? Are you okay? Like, what's going on? He started telling me about he was at his friend's house at a sleepover, and they were toying around with a Ouija board. And he started talking about how his hand was being guided around. He started seeing really, I won't say what the words were, in being written all over the wall. Not literally, but like it looked like it was done in human blood and entrails. Like, and he was saying like horrific messages. And it was the one time where I knew, it was like, I knew he's not telling me the truth. So I remember to this day, I remember seeing commercials of like, you ever seen those 80s Ouija board commercials?
Yeah.
Like I remember seeing those, my hair would stand on end. Like I had this instinct of like, that is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Later on, when I was studying Mormonism, I learned about Joseph Smith and his use of the occult. And I remember reading James White's book, Letters to a Mormon Elder, and that was really the first time in trying to understand Christian apologetics to deal with my classmates. That was the first time I had seen Deuteronomy 18 quoted. There shall not be any of you who is a medium, or all these things are abomination, Lord, just paraphrasing it.
Yeah.
So my observation, in contrast to yours and other people that Andrew and I have spoken with, is me kind of walking up, like even as a kid, you know, you see a fence, this is private property, no trespassing, and it's like, I don't think violators will be prosecuted, violators will be shot on sight.
Yes.
Looking at that sign, I'm like, I'm not going to go over there. And
I'm the kid running around.
And you're the kid who ran over that, and all of a sudden it's like, and as a contrast, you saw and observed the upside down world, if you want to call it that.
Absolutely. And you know, I think what isn't necessarily obvious is that all this oneness world, it all ends up in the same spot, which is all is one, and it's about your own self-fulfillment. So the way, and this is where Burning Man fits in. Burning Man is about self-expression. By expressing yourself, by manifesting your best life, and letting everything out and being you, that is the route to self-transcendence ultimately. So it's very self-fulfilling, self-centered, right, is what it's very much about. And so the dangerous ideology that comes along with ayahuasca and Kabbalism and all this stuff is all very much, again, do what thou wilt, as being very spiritual in nature. And so people go to ayahuasca ceremonies for inner healing in order so that they might live their best life. It's not about, it's not necessarily just about what it includes, it's about what it excludes, which is any sort of understanding of God's law. That is not permitted. In fact, that world, which we'll get to, why there's so much discussion of the divine feminine, is actively about excluding the divine masculine, or the Father, God the Father. It's all about God the Mother, and we'll talk about that to extent. So it's all the same thing.
Hey, what's up, everyone? We love that you are enjoying our content on a weekly basis, but this program cannot continue and wouldn't be possible without your support. So if you want to go to thecultistshow.com, there is a donate tab. You can either support us one time, or you can become a monthly partner with us. That will allow us to continue this program, allow us to continue to be salt and light to the kingdom of the cults. So please go to thecultistshow.com/donate, and you can support us one time or monthly. Also, make sure you check out our merchandise store. Go to shopcultish.com. You can see all of our great designs. A lot of you have gotten merchandise from us already. So again, either go to shopcultish.com and check out all the awesome merch. Back to the show. Okay, so then going back to the ayahuasca and giving those experimentations, that became a really huge part of you really looking to really find the fulfillment. I think there might be a connection between, you know, those different father wounds, the different traumas you're trying to find healing from in that tent at Burning Man. You're trying to find the tent. Now you're trying to find it through this beverage.
Yeah.
Take us into that.
Yeah, so people like ayahuasca because like there's no escape from it. Like if you're sitting in a talk therapy, for example, with a therapist, right, and you're not able to verbalize something or you're afraid to say it, you can back out of it or shut down. You take ayahuasca, you're just in it. And so it's and that's why there are increasingly powerful other earth medicines or plant medicines like Bufo alvarius, which is the venom of the Sonoran desert toad, which I've also done. The Sonoran desert toad, it excretes this venom so that when birds try to eat it, the bird's like, no, I don't want that, and flies away. So humans, being humans, they take that and they scrape it off and they dry it and they smoke it. And I've done that too. And it's also DMT, increasingly powerful substances to have a more direct experience, very mystical, very Gnostic, right? And so I liked ayahuasca because it was like, give give it to me straight, like hit me with it. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like Neo in the Matrix, like, I know Kung Fu. It was that kind of thing, right? And so so in November of 2015, I had my first 3 of 15 ayahuasca ceremonies. So I had 3, 1, 2, 3, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. And then that was a very powerful experience, getting introduced to like that tradition and the different dimensions of it. The very very out of the jungle tradition, let's put it that way. And then in March of 2016, a number of months later, I started traveling, and I went down to South America first. So fulfilling my dream of traveling around the world, I sold everything I owned, but a few boxes that I put in storage, car, furniture, all gone. And I had a carry-on size backpack, and I started traveling. And one of the first places I went was South America. And I went down not directly, but I ended up in Peru, where while I was down there, I did a 12-night ayahuasca retreat, and I did 7 ceremonies in 12 nights.
7 ceremonies in 12 nights.
Yeah, so 2 ceremonies, then a night off, then 3 ceremonies and a night off, and then 2 ceremonies.
What's the typical like gap between ceremonies? Like it sounds like you're saying that this was extra than what people normally do. What do people normally do in this world? Well,
most people who talk about ayahuasca will do 1, maybe 2 in their whole lifetime. Maybe the people who are like serious about it will do 3 in a row, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay. To do 7 in 12 nights is like, it's.
Why did you do that though? Was it bragging rights, or I know this world, going back to the lady I spoke with this morning, I looked with her with a straight face and I talked to her about the things she had been in contact with, the entities. And she was a little taken back that even as a Christian, she was maybe expecting me to say, "Oh, you're just making it up in your head." Mm-hmm. Like, why so many back to back? Like, was it just kind of like a narcotic, like out of control? You know, like you think about a person who is in like people who are out of control alcoholic, they take 1 sip of a beer, and next thing you know, they're blacked out, not really seeing the photo collage like from the night before, or like why did you do that?
It wasn't like that, thankfully. I'm the sort of guy that signs up to do crazy things, and only after signing up to do them realizes that they're crazy. Yeah. So it was like, so I signed up for that, like, oh, that sounds fine. And then once I actually got on site at the retreat center, I was like, oh, what have I done? Yeah. Yeah. So it was like a little bit like getting myself into something, but it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to ride this out, and get as much out of it as I could. And it was a legit experience. And with that many ceremonies, that close together, that much back to back, and being in this jungle-based retreat center, no electricity, like all kerosene lanterns and flashlights, very, very back to nature. Yeah. I got the chance to really observe up close, with my critical faculty still intact, what was actually going on. Because I was able to be reflecting on myself, or able to see myself and what I was going on, rather than being completely lost in it. I was able to hold both of that and taking notes in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Like, knowing what you know now, like, how do you observe? I mean, you're talking, and I want to make an emphasis, is that, like, we're kind of, sometimes you talk about, when you think about something silly you did in high school, or like in college, and I have those stories as well too. You kind of laugh at it as you're sharing a story back and forth. I want to make emphasis that we're not glorifying like this. No. Like this is a fun thing. No. It's more like in the spirit of like, I can't believe I actually did that. Yeah. Right. Yeah. How do you view?
I really can't.
Like, now you're in Christ. Like, how do you view your old self now? Like, in that, like, what do you like? How do you view? Because you don't have a dependency and need for that stuff anymore. No. In fact, you would say, no, I'm not going to touch that, because that's a catalyst to get into things that God says don't go there. Yeah. But like, knowing what you know now, like, how do you view your old self now?
So I have to answer that, I have to view it in context of the rest of my travels, which took place over the next 4 years. Okay. So like I said, I did the Bufo Alvarius, DMT trip, which is it's a whole thing. I think I sent you, I got my face all beat up because I blacked out. That's a whole thing. Yeah. But I also went to like I said, the Kumbh Mela Hindu Festival, 190 million Hindus, 2019. You can look up largest gathering in human history. I was there. I did
Is that in India?
Yeah, that was in Prayagraj, India. So, the UK paper, The Guardian, said it was the largest human gathering ever.
Okay.
And it was like, again, 190 million Hindus, and like maybe 5 white people, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so I also did a Buddhist Vipassana retreat in the mountains of Kashmir, literally up in the mountains of like disputed territory, which was 10 hours of meditation a day for 10 days. And I sailed the South Pacific. So, from Fiji to Vanuatu to New Caledonia. I did Himalayan Mountaineering Institute, which was a mountain climbing school run by the Indian government in the mountains of the Himalayas. So I've done a lot of these different things. And so as I look back, I view that ayahuasca experience in context, and I say, I think that, first of all, there's no reason that I should have been brought safely back from any of those. Any one of those would be physically, spiritually, emotionally dangerous in any kinds of ways, right? And so I look back on that, and when I got back to the United States from my travels in March 2020, let me just close the story because it'll help answer your question.
Yeah.
I kept in touch with with my friends from Idaho who I met at Burning Man Spirit Dream. When I arrived back in the United States in February of 2020, just before COVID, Rob, who helped run the Spirit Dream Camp, sent me a book for Christmas, Simply Christian by N.T. Wright. And I received that book the day I got back to the United States, and I started reading it as COVID was happening. And one of the things that isn't talked about in the oneness tradition is evil. They don't talk about evil. They don't talk about things that are legitimate. Like, we would all agree that Jeffrey Epstein, the stuff that goes on with Jeffrey Epstein, which is all in the open now, it's evil, right? Yeah. Okay. The New Age won't talk about that, because they won't be able to address it because it shatters their whole worldview. And we can talk about that separately. But I had this question because I knew it was real and I couldn't deny it. Yeah. So suddenly in this book, Simply Christian by N.T. Wright, he talks about Christ up on the cross and this giant wave of evil coming to crush him. And through his death and sacrifice and resurrection, he drove back this giant wave of evil and overcame evil forever. And that's in that book. And when I read that, I got it. I'm like, yes. And then I read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and then I read Screw Tape Letters. And finally, not only had I met these warm and loving and caring and welcoming Christians, I was seeing Christianity. I described it at the time as I was being spoken to about Christianity through these books like I was an adult. Right? And I was like, these are the answers I've been looking for. Yeah. So I got baptized in September 2020. I flew up to Coeur d'Alene to visit my friends, and they baptized me in the Coeur d'Alene River, which was a beautiful moment for me. So that was about 2 years ago now. So I tell that story because you ask, as I look back on myself, what do I think of myself? And what I think happened is that I met Christ at Burning Man in 2015, and he sent me on an adventure. He sent me around the world to go experience all these different things and see them with my critical faculties open and my eyes open out of genuine curiosity. I wasn't looking to belong. I wasn't looking for an ideology to be a part of. I genuinely wanted to learn, and I always had since I was 12. Yeah. And so he sent me on this adventure. I was kept safe through the whole thing so I could come back, meet him the day I got back to the United States. Simply Christian was put in my hands. I came back, and then, several months later, it became clear to me after I was baptized, it felt as if God had said to me, Will, you've only ever wanted 2 things, which was to explore the outer world and to explore the inner world. And you have both of those things. And I gave you both of those things, and you've come back safe, and now serve me. Yeah. So, yes, Lord, I serve.
Right. And you get to, and what's amazing too is that you always see this duality in the world of the New Age. There's always this conflict. But you literally see that, like, theologically, like in the person of Christ, you see God who's come in the flesh, who's fully God and fully man. So you have just in the person of Christ, you have the full, like, synchronicity that there's no duality. Yeah. But then you also see the full combination of good and evil in Christ and the cross. Yes. So you see the perfect syncretism there. You see good. As far as God, and then God pouring out his wrath on the Son, and true evil that took place both in the Romans and Jews that were conspiring together, but also just in the fact of what took place. But then you also have our sin in place for our sin, and then Christ's righteousness in our place. And so you see all these things where there's duality everywhere else. We're in oneism. All of a sudden, perfect twoism offers perfect synchronicity and also peace with God. Yes. And in some ways, I'm trying to speak as much as I can in the New Age native tongue if anyone's listening in. So But yeah, that is so good, and that's so encouraging. And then, like, what would you say now? Like, you're new in Christ, and this has been like a long track for you.
Mm,
Like, you kind of, and again, we've only given cliff notes over your
I
resume. I'm
know.
sure there's a lot more you can unpack
So
about the
much
Hindu
more.
festival. If there's anyone who's listening in who maybe they're just curious, maybe they're kind of listening in with their arms folded, and like
Mm,
maybe they think, well, I've done a 1 or 2 ayahuasca trips. They've actually been not that bad. I feel like I have this great insight. I'm kind of on this path, and maybe you're off the path or whatever. Like, what would you say? What would you say to them? Say they're like looking at you still, their arms folded, because you've got this resume
mm,
that like you've done, like you haven't done that, been there, done that.
hmm
Like, what would you say to them?
I'll give you some wisdom that my friends at Spirit Dream gave me. And because I asked them about this, I asked them, so much of the New Age world is about trauma and inner healing.
Yeah.
How does that square with Christianity? And what they told me, what Barb told me, shout out Barb, what Barb told me was that in the New Age world, which they understand very well from being in it firsthand, they say that that life writes on us, right? But in the Christian world, they're honest about the fact that we write on life. Our sin nature writes on life.
Yeah.
And the New Age world talks about one, but not the other, right? And so we write on life. We have an impact on those around us, and we have an impact on ourselves. That's sin. And we're all looking for absolution from sin, for forgiveness from other people. Self-forgiveness is a big thing that's talked about in the New Age world, right? Like Aaron Rodgers talks about, I forgave myself, forgave my parents, and all that stuff. But there's also a component of we're looking for forgiveness from a source that's so much greater than us. And that's what I learned, is that looking for forgiveness from God for some aspect of myself that can never be healed, and that's original sin. That we feel that's where the New Age gets a trap, is that if I just keep doing one more modality, one more thing, then I'll finally achieve that ultimate forgiveness that I'm looking for from myself and others, and I'll be released. Well, the thing is you can't, because original sin is part of us. The only way that we can be forgiven from original sin is by God, by accepting Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. And that peace with God, that forgiveness, that's the true transformative thing. That not only helps heal the trauma, but helps us to stop writing on life. And that's what ultimately people are looking for when they want to live their best life. It's not just to manifest what you want.
Yeah.
It's you want peace with your environment, your peace with yourself, peace with the universe, peace with God. And that's the thing for someone with their arms folded. Yeah, you'll constantly be looking for trauma to heal and forgiveness, but are you able to accept the magnitude of forgiveness by God? Letting that in, that's the true trip. It's something that I literally thank God. I pray to God, say thank you every night for, and every meal for too.
Awesome. Well, let's do this. We've gone quite a bit here. We're going to take a quick break. Well, next we're going to go and cut off right here. We're going to have the next segment. We are going to focus in on this podcast recently with Aubrey Marcus and Aaron Rodgers. I'll tell you what, just on a side note, first of all, man, such a blessing. Thank you for coming on to share your story. If I never would have expected at the beginning of Cultish, I would be having a whole episode dedicated to talking about an NFL quarterback and his use of a psychotropic plant I've never even heard of, but here we are. Welcome to 2022.
Yeah, right.
So anyways, if you guys enjoyed this program, definitely know what you thought. Just real quickly, where can people find you if they want to find out more about you?
You can find me. I host the Renaissance of Men podcast about the rebirth of masculinity and femininity happening around the world, and how inspired that's been and how inspired I've been by Christ and Christianity. You can find more about that by going to linktree/renofmen.
Excellent. All right. Well, all that being said, thank you for listening in, and we'll talk to you next week on Cultish, where we enter into the kingdom of the cults. Talk to you guys soon.